Advisors for Donald Trump say a name consistently coming up these days as his potential running mate is one of the many rivals the former president faced in 2016, Florida Senator Marco Rubio. However, if Rubio ultimately isn't Trump's pick for vice president, it might not be because of what he represents, but because of the state he represents. A new article in the Bulwark explores Trump's consideration of Senator Rubio as his running mate and the unique reason why he may not choose him. The author of that article, Marc Caputo, joins us now. He's a national political reporter for the Bulwark and the author of the MAGAville newsletter. Okay, Marc, thanks so much for joining us. Let's start right there. It would be very unusual to see a presidential candidate and a running mate both be from the same state, because usually the strategy is you choose someone who helps you in another part of the country. But in this case, both men are from Florida. So does that weaken Rubio's chances of being chosen?
Well, it weakens his chances in that the 12th Amendment of the Constitution essentially forbids it, in the wonky rules of the Electoral College. If the vice president and president hail from the same state, then that state's Electoral College votes won't go to the ticket. And so therefore, in Florida, that's 30, it's 11% of the total. That's not something that Donald Trump wants to lose out on. And Florida used to be a swing state, is now barely a battleground. It's in his pocket. You don't want to endanger those votes. So the easy thing to do would be to have Marco Rubio just move. The Constitution also says the United States senator has to be 35 years old at least, has to have lived in the state for, 7 years. Also has to be a resident or inhabitant of the state when they're elected. After they're elected, they can actually kind of move according to one strict reading of the Constitution. So technically, Rubio could just do that and change his address to D.C. There's an additional wrinkle, though, with Rubio and the name you also mentioned, which is Ron DeSantis. Donald Trump still doesn't like Ron DeSantis. And if Marco Rubio were to resign his post, then that would give Ron DeSantis the ability to pick a successor. And depending on when that resignation happens, that successor could be in office for 2 years. Donald Trump doesn't want Ron DeSantis to have a successor. So, according to the sources we've spoken to, one of the things that Donald Trump is going to consider is that if he does pick Rubio, not only would Rubio have to change his address, he might have to resign his office rather instantly in order to trigger a special election or an election in November. And this would be the first time, if this happens, that Florida would have had a double Senate election in the same year since 1936. Now, all this stuff is very theoretical. Trump hasn't really paid a lot of attention to this. He's in trial right now. So once he's out of trial, later this month, then he's really going to start putting sort of rubber to the road or his glasses to the dossier.
This is all kind of head spinning, particularly the part where the senator from Florida would have to move out of Florida to be eligible to be Donald Trump's running mate. But setting that aside, there's another big issue here, and you wrote about it in your article. It's the fact that Rubio ran a scorched earth campaign against Trump in 2016, even went after the size of Trump's hands. Trump called him Little Marco for months. Yeah. I don't even think Rubio would have wanted to be Trump's running mate back then. So why might he want it now?
Well, the two of them have grown rather close, or they grew rather close, especially when Trump became president. One of the things that was interesting in the 2016 race is Donald Trump crushed Marco Rubio, including in their now mutual home state of Florida. But there was one county, only one of 67, that Donald Trump lost. That was Miami-Dade County, which is where I live, where Rubio lives. It's a heavy, heavy Cuban-American county. And Trump didn't like that loss. And also he lost the county by 30 points to Hillary Clinton in 2016 when he did win the state. Anyway, once Rubio got reelected to the Senate and Trump got elected as president, the two grew close and Rubio became an architect of Donald Trump's Cuba policy. And he became a de facto Secretary of State for the Western Hemisphere. In fact, he even was so close and so well regarded by Trump that Rubio at one point talked him out of military action, taking up military action in Venezuela. So it gives you an idea of the close working relationship the two had, and they've continued to have it, or they've had more than a détente, a friendship and a mutual respect. Now, just to be very clear, the name we hear circulate the most, and apparently the name that Donald Trump mentions the most, is J.D. Vance. He's the Ohio senator. However, the people I've spoken to said, look, if Rubio wasn't from Florida, if these weren't the issues, he would more than likely be the pick. He not only has been tested by fire, Rubio, having run for president, he's a three-term senator. He has that foreign policy experience. And unlike, well, except one other senator who's a Democrat in Menendez in the Senate, Marco Rubio is the only bilingual senator who can speak Spanish fluently, easily, and in fact, at one point was a pundit on some Spanish language networks here when he was in between political jobs. And that's a very attractive thing for Donald Trump to want. Now, what he decides, again, we don't know. I think we're going to find out in, probably in May. The calculation I did and looking at how Florida's election law works is that if Trump wants Marco Rubio, he would probably have to make that announcement by around June 10th to June 14th.
Super fascinating. We'll be watching. Marc Caputo, thank you so much for the insights. Really appreciate it.